Well, it's Sunday and it's auction day at the Calgary Aquarium Society, and I have to admit I came home with quite a haul of things that I was looking to do or looking to acquire. Most exciting was I got 2 bags that contain, I don't know if it'll focus, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but they are zebra Otocinclus. So that's kind of a goldfish for me. I got 2 individually bagged ones here, and I'm very, very excited to put those in. The other ones I got were 3 very, very generous portions of Java ferns. They all look like sort of standard Java fern. Have cats attacking my phone, and that will be a nice addition to the redo on the big 90-gallon tank, which is behind me. So kind of an exciting acquisition, and look forward to adding the zebras into my breeding program. Can't really tell at the moment genders, sorry, but they look nice and healthy, so we'll go get those quarantined and medicated, and we'll quarantine the plants and the autos at the same time. So look forward to seeing those in future iterations. Okay, so here's the quarantine setup. Right now I've just got an AquaClear 50 running without media. I don't leave cycled media in this tank because there's no source of ammonia, and eventually the bacteria would die off. And so usually what happens when I set up a quarantine tank is I go steal some media, some ceramic media from my sump for the 90 upstairs, put it in here, and that usually gets things going. So in order to protect the autos, I'm probably going to put an AquaClear 50 sponge over the inside, run a 50 sponge to protect the media, and then just put some ceramic media on top. Just waiting for the temperature to stabilize, so I've decided to run this tank not with pure RO like the tank upstairs, but I'm going to run about a 50-50 mix of RO water and our tap water here, which tends to be very hard, just because I suspect that the autos, if they were from a Canadian or from a Calgary source, will not be used to something quite that hard. Yeah, so next step would be to add the Java fern in here, go grab some ceramic media, wait for the temperature to stabilize, and then we start floating the autos. Stay tuned. So in terms of processing the new plants, I don't generally do too much quarantining with plants, other than to maybe let them sit in a tank for a little while, see if there's any snails or hitchhikers that come in with them. What I'll do when I bring a new bag of plants in is I'll give it I'll pour out the tank water that comes with it. I'll give it a couple of fills and rinses with untreated tap water, which will have a bit of chlorine in it, but it doesn't stay in there for very long. And then I'll add it into my quarantine tank. I've had a quick look at this Java, and I didn't pay tons for it. I mean, this bag here was 30 bucks. And it's long, in reasonable shape. Some of it, I'm not sure if this bag would be the same, but the last bag I just put into the other tank had a reasonable amount of blackbeard algae and that sort of thing on it, which, while not ideal, is not the end of the world. I've got a small army of Amano shrimp upstairs, which I can put in here for a few weeks to take care of that, and everything should be okay. So that's the treatment anyway. Fill the bag up with untreated water a couple of times. If you're really worried, you can put a drop or 2 of dechlor in it, and then add it into a quarantine tank. I don't put this directly into my display tank. Not that it would likely cause any issues, but it's always nice to have clean plants when they go into the big tank. Okay, so that's what $65 or $70 worth of Java fern looks like. I got it from what looks like 3 different vendors, or not vendors, but people that submitted things to the auction. All of which has blackbeard algae to some degree. It's pretty common to see blackbeard algae on Java fern just because it tends to be one of the slower growing plants in the aquarium, and it's not as able to uptake nutrients quickly, so it tends to end up growing some things like blackbeard without being in a dedicated tank or having a lot of care taken towards it. So Again, not the end of the world, but I'm glad I'm going to be isolating it for a little while to give my army of shrimp a chance to clean it up. Didn't bother to remove all of the extra little bits of gravel that came in on it. Somebody had some very entertaining looking blue gravel, and other people used looked like fluorite or something like that. And because it's a quarantine tank, I won't worry too much about it. But that's what I do for the plants. So the plants will receive the same medications that the fish do, just in case it brings anything in on it. Probably wouldn't be a risk of cross-contamination, but you know, it never hurts. So next up will be to add the medication. So I'll be adding a 20-gallon one-time dose of EMF erythromycin, so that'd be 2 little packets, 2 packets of General Cure, and a 20-gallon dose of Icax. That's just in case the autos bring anything with them. They'll stay in here for at least a couple of weeks, and we'll see how they end up making out. So next step, to medicate the tank. Okay, so that's the aftermath of the medications. I've added, like I said, 2 packs of General Cure, 2 packs of erythromycin, both of which treat 10 gallons each. This is a 20-gallon tank. And I've added 10 milliliters of Icax. Now I won't redose this over the course of the week if the fish look fine. It's just a one-time sort of quarantine dose for me. If I see anything pop up over the course of the week that would indicate further treatment, so if they suddenly developed a full-blown case of ick, I would treat it as per the bottle. But for the most part, this is what I put into the quarantine dosing. Now, I don't get into worrying about the fact that a US 20-gallon tank actually contains 18 gallons and some of that's used up by substrate or anything like that. I just dose it. Bottle says 20 gallon or 10 gallons per, tank's supposed to be 20. Call her good. Don't overthink these. These medications aren't sensitive enough that they're going to worry too much about that sort of thing. Just as a little bit of a heads up on the Icax, you'll note that the tank has a little bit of a bluish tinge to it. Because these are breeder tanks, I don't really care too much, and interestingly enough, all of the white sponges that are in here will eventually be dyed blue over the course of this week. I'm adding new sponges in here right away, but they will turn blue. So if that offends you, perhaps have some dedicated quarantine setups that don't get used for anything else. Doesn't bother me, so I don't stress out too much about it. And then what I wanted to show here was just putting an intake sponge over the end of the intake for the AquaClear. What I find is it helps to prevent fry and shrimp and inquisitive fish from getting sucked into these. I have actually had autos get their noses jammed into the little openings on the intake of the intake pipe here. So I've long ago started protecting the intakes on everything. It also provides a lot more area for beneficial bacteria to grow. Won't be that big of a deal in this because this tank won't likely support too much for the next little while anyway, so the beneficial bacteria will come in from the ceramic media that I'm going to be adding from the big tank upstairs. But you know, it never hurts. So you can get dedicated intake sponges. So Corey Aquarium Co-op will sell you a nice dedicated round intake sponge with a nicely milled hole in it. All I do is I take an AquaClear 20 sponge, cut a small slit in the center of it with an X-Acto knife and put it on the end here. One tip I picked up from him is make sure that you're not sliding the sponge so far up the tube here that it's drawing water from the lower portion. Because essentially, if you jam this all the way down to the point where the water is being taken in here, you're wasting all of this sponge room up here. So only slide it on so far as to have the water being drawn in from here, and you'll get a little bit of water being drawn from that area as well. So you're making most use of your sponge. So a couple little tips. Since I'm zoomed in here, you can see little bits of medication that still haven't dissolved. You can see the blackbeard algae that's come in off the Java fern. Not the end of the world. Can get taken care of, and you know, I'm not going to complain too much about this much Java fern coming in for 70 bucks, because that's a lot of individual $15 pots around here. So onwards, the next step will be pre-dosing the tank with a little bit of fertilizer, and I'll show you what I use after I dose that. So I've gone ahead and dosed the tank with fertilizer as well for the Java fern. I use the Plant Guys PPS Micro and Macro packages. It's designed for the PPS Pro system, which in theory specifies 1 milliliter of each of these solutions per 10 gallons per day. So this being a 20-gallon tank, in theory I would be dosing 2 milliliters of each of these solutions every day. Though that's the theory, what I found is that it doesn't take into account the volume of plant matter that you have in your tank. So keep an eye on your nitrates, and particularly dose your PPS macros based off of your nitrates. If you're finding that the nitrates are increasing quicker than the plants can take them up, then back off on your dosing. If you're finding that the nitrates are disappearing overnight, you might want to up the dosage a little bit to compensate for that. And then I just dose the micros in proportion to the macros. So for every 1 milliliter of macro solution I dose 1 milliliter of micro. I'm not sure how the Java fern is going to be picking up on this. The tanks currently just got a single T5 sunblaster over it that it shares with the tank beside it, which doesn't have anything in it at the moment. So we'll see what the Java fern picks up, and we'll dose appropriately. I've started out the dosage with only a single day's worth of fertilizer, and I'll come back tomorrow and start to monitor the water parameters and see how things are working out. Okay, so I've added the intake back onto the tank, or back onto the filter. I'm not going to bother with a lid on either the filter or on the tank itself, because autos aren't known to be jumpers. I've come along and I've added in the biomaterial from the tank upstairs. I'm not too worried that, again, I need more material than this because we're only talking about 2 autos and there's a generous portion of plants in here, so odds are that the biomaterial and the beneficial bacteria that came in off the plants, if this was a planted tank or a fish-in tank that it came off of, should be more than capable of supporting the 2 fish. And looking at the little digital thermometer up here at 72 Fahrenheit, that's not ideal for autos. Ideally you'd want it up at 75 or so, maybe 78 to 80 if you're trying to breed. But for now it's better than the room temperature that we've got here, so I'm going to start floating the bags, and I'll come in and monitor the temperature over the course of the next 5 or 6 hours, and hopefully it stabilizes somewhere around 75. So that's the next plan. And there we go. So we have our 2 new critters floating in the tank. Don't know if you'll be able to see them there, but they're pretty pale, not really loving life at the moment. They've been through a lot of stress in the last little while, because I imagine they were probably bagged 24 to 48 hours ago, depending on when people got their stuff together. So they've been in the bag for a while. They're pretty sensitive fish generally until they're in a tank and stabilized, so I don't know how these folks have been worked with before. I'm not sure who sold them, so we'll give them a chance to adjust here, and then we'll release them into the main aquarium. And so once these guys are ready to be released, the next step will be to pour them through a net over a bucket, get rid of the wastewater that they came in, and drop them into the tank. I don't drip acclimate, particularly coming from an auction where they've been in the bag for a while. Any ammonia that's in the bag will immediately become more toxic when new air is introduced into the bags. So I don't drip acclimate anymore. I've done that a bunch with autos and haven't had a problem with drip acclimating, but I've also started to not bother, and it's a conscious choice. It's not just I'm being lazy and not drip acclimating. The fish, you can't really usefully drip acclimate them slowly enough to make the transition worthwhile, and you'll also, you risk introducing problems from any ammonia that's in the bag if they've been in there for a while. So I don't bother, and the fish have always been pretty good about that. So we'll monitor the temperature for the next little while, and we'll see how things go. And after that, after I release the fish, I'll show you how they're doing. Okay, just on the feeding side before I'm ready to release these guys. I'm not sure when they were last fed, but I'm going to add a little piece of unthawed and skewered zucchini, which I'll poke into the substrate, and then a little piece of Soylent Green Rapashi food that I'll chuck into the tank there as well. The tank itself is got, I don't think I ever mentioned it, has got a peat substrate. So it's got about 1.5 inches of peat covered in a layer of sand, and that can kind of help to make sure that the pH stays a little lower and the water a little softer, in line with what these guys like. So I think we're ready to release them, and then I'll put together my final little thoughts. I should actually point out that they're already starting to color up quite a bit. Man, those are good looking fish too. But I should really be turning these lights off. I normally wouldn't have the lights on over top of them, except in the case of videoing. So I'm going to turn the light off now and let them settle in without the lights on. So check back once that's good to go. Okay, in order to get them out of the bag, I put together, or I put a very fine but largemouth net on top of a little trash can, pour the fish bag through here, and then dump the fish directly into the tank. That gets them into their final water as quickly as possible and lets them get the acclimation period over with as quickly as they can. So here we go. I won't be able to film this because I don't have a tripod set up, but here's hoping it goes well. Okie dokie, so acclimation period over with and Otto's successfully released. They've kind of huddled together in this corner over here and are already starting to color up a little bit. They've got, at least one of them's got nice erect fins, and so he doesn't seem to be, or he or she doesn't seem to be doing too badly overall. So now I'll just work on making sure that we get the temperature back where they need it to be and monitor them for the next week or so. The tank should be enough to kind of get them through their acclimation period and into the big tank. Once I'm comfortable that they're not going to be bringing anything in that anybody else has to deal with, and once they make sure that they're happy. So overall, though I wasn't intending on bringing any fish at all home from this auction, these have been two that I've been absolutely thrilled to see. They look to be well taken care of and healthy. I have no idea at the moment what sex they are. Be great if it was a male and a female, but you know, odds are only 50-50 that that's going to happen. So just final thoughts on the quarantine setup. It's not a bad setup. Ideally I would have liked a sponge filter in here, but I don't have an extra air pump, so don't have that option at the moment. I do have some extra sponge filters that I've left going in the sump of the big 90 upstairs, but don't have an air pump downstairs to drive them with. So that's the reason that I've left the water level a little bit low, so that the AquaClear is aerating the water more than it would if it was just spilling into a fully filled up tank. So the little bubbles that you see at the outlet there are intentional. So having a little bit of a fall and a little bit of circulation there is intentional. So check back over the next little while and I'll let you know how these guys are going, and we'll make sure that they eat and make sure that they're happy, and we'll see how things go. Thanks very much. Hopefully this has answered any questions that you might have about how to bring fish home from an auction, and if you have any questions on that regard, or in that regard, feel free to leave them below. Thanks very much. Have a great day, folks. Bye. Well, it's about 10 o'clock and everybody seems to have settled in okay. The tank's at the temperature and the autos are all nice and colored up. So I'm going to call this a good night. I'm not sure I can see them from through there. Gonna get a better idea about what they're coloring. They're a pretty neat looking fish, and they haven't moved very far from when I let them go, but they're probably still trying to figure out this change in life that's happened. So anyway, I will keep you updated on things, and we'll post any updates after we release them.